Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Greer. Thank you for
Hey,
being here today.
thank you, Raven.
Great. We have some interesting topics to discuss today. One being the 3-eye atlas that everyone's so concerned about. Can you give us some insights on that, Dr. Greer?
Yes, one of the recent breaking news last week about this is that there was a uh, monitoring system that did pick up that the radio frequencies coming from that Atlas comet is actually natural, which all comets give off, and it's not at all artificial or unnatural frequencies. And of course, one of the problems, and I think it's a PSYOP, psychological warfare operation by Avi Loeb, because he's trying to get $1 billion for a planetary defense system, which of course is of course exactly the ruse that was played on President Reagan, where he put billions into the brilliant Pebbles and SDI, Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative, space weapons system back in the 80s. So this has been going on for decades. We know that Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, that he on his deathbed told Carol Rosin, very dear friend of mine, that in fact that this whole game would be played out where they try to present a alien threat and from outer space, but it specifically said also it would be preceded by the threats from comets and asteroids from outer space. So this is a 70-year-old PSYOP game they've been playing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that I wish people would just do a scintilla of science. So the tragedy here is that you have an astrophysicist at Harvard who seems to have all the credentials, and yet what he is saying about this object is so unscientific. So let me do some math and science for you. It's very simple. The object is moving at 137,000 miles per hour. Now, that sounds really fast, and for a comet, it is fast. However, as an interstellar object, it's incredibly slow. And if you were to take, and it actually, because of gravitational forces, sped up as it got pulled into some of the gravitational fields of the large objects in our solar system. If you look at, which is natural and normal because there is a pull of the gravity of the mass of other large bodies in our solar system as opposed to interstellar space, which is furthest away from any mass object that would create gravitational waves. So when you look at this, the closest star system to Earth is Proxima Centauri. It's 2.4 light years. Now, a light year, just so you all get clear, is not a measure of time, it's a measure of distance. It's how far in 1 year light would travel at 186,000 miles per second. Every second, 186,000 miles for a year. So multiply how many seconds there are in an hour, how many hours are in a day, how many days are in a year, and each of those seconds is 186,000 miles per hour. It's enormous, trillions of miles. So even at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, which is unbelievably faster than 137,000 miles per hour, right?
Right.
That what you have is a 66,500 year time to get from the closest red dwarf star, which is a red dwarf, Proxima Centauri, to here. So the idea that it picked up on our early electromagnetic signals and radio waves emanating from the Earth in the late 1800s and 1900s, and that it launched and finally got here is the biggest gaslighting scientifically and absurdity. And the problem is that every media outlet that I have been on, this is the only thing they want to talk about. And
Right.
I tell people, just pull out your phone, which has a calculator function in it, and run the numbers. So this is one of the real problems because in the UFO subculture and the mainstream media that doesn't have a scientific orientation, no one does any scientific rigor or even common sense.
Right.
So just forget that. And then of course you had another network who shall remain nameless recently have some charlatan on who claimed to be a military remote viewer that this 3I Atlas comet had millions of Draco reptilians on it. Ooh, scary. All nonsense. Just complete utter, you know. And of course, all of this is designed to create the specter of fear
Right.
as a psychological conditioning for the whole war of the worlds and conflict that this transnational criminal organization that's kept a secret for 80 years is trying to do. That has been their overarching strategy since the 1950s, and we know this. So this is just one example of it. Now, the more another recent example of it, which is of great national security concern, I want to address. Many of you know that back a couple years ago, there was a talk show host on Fox and then subsequently later on X named Tucker Carlson who got gaslit by some people who are religiously oriented with the ET or UAP UFO issue. They convinced him that the UFOs were from not from other star systems, but from other dimensions, and that they were agents of Satan. Um, and the whole interdimensional, that they're coming from another dimension and they're the agents of Satan. Then, and these ideas are so untutored as they beggar the imagination, frankly. I'll be very blunt.
Mhm.
Then you have this rot has been crept into the House Oversight Committee, where you have the chairperson of the House Oversight Task Force dealing with UFOs and UAPs, Miss Luna, who I personally briefed and met, also saying that these are interdimensional and they're related to demons and angels and all that. And then the most frightening of all is in the past few weeks, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, has made similar comments. So I want to address this, and I'm going to be very clear about it. I would refer people to a paper I wrote in the 1990s called ETs and the New Cosmology, where it unpacks the whole understanding of the cosmos, allowing for other dimensions and the dimensions of consciousness, thought, higher, lower dimensions, but also the cosmos that we understand as the physical cosmos, meaning the normal universe. The whole cosmos, to me, is not only the three-dimensional universe, but all the worlds of light, all the other dimensions, astral, causal, all of it. And it's a conscious quantum hologram. Now, when you start talking about interstellar travel, you're not going to go from point A to B. Let's go through this exercise again. And let's say that you're from a star system that's only 1% of the distance across our Milky Way galaxy. Our Milky Way galaxy is approximately 1,000 light years across. Now, if you were 1% of the way, which is very close, it's in our nearby galactic neighborhood, right, of solar systems.
Mhm.
The galaxy is of 100 billion stars. Our solar system is our star, the sun, and our planets. Just for clarity for people, go back to our grade school astronomy, which people forget. That's fine. And so if you're 1% across our galaxy, which is very much in our neighborhood, right?
Right.
Galactic neighborhood, that's 1,000 light years. So at the speed of light, it would take 1,000 years to get there and 1,000 years to go back, 2,000 years, the time since the birth of Christ. Now, similarly, if you're communicating with something like this is going to take 1,000 years to send a signal at the speed of light, which is what our radio frequencies are, and to receive an answer back another 1,000. So that's 2,000 years again. So whether you're talking about transportation or communication, the speed of light is too slow. It's too damn slow.
Yep.
A priori, by definition, you must have technologies that are trans-dimensional, faster than the speed of light. And when you go through what I called back then in the early 90s, the crossing point of light, like you have the sound barrier you go through,
Mhm.
boom, in the atmosphere normally. except for UFOs, for reasons we can go into. But when you're going beyond the speed of light, the matter, the whole object, resonantly has the frequency shift beyond the frequency of electrons and neutrons and protons and subatomic particles and all of it. And when that happens, it is in another dimension. So it's 3D here. It's then beyond 3D, trans-dimensional, to go from A to B. It's not going at the speed of light. It's dropping out of linear space-time. So even the idea of it going through a wormhole or whatever, but the actual physical experience of that is very akin to like a lucid dream, or that sort of that aspect. And it's very interesting. And then when it's coming, wants to come into 3D, say over the Earth or somewhere, then it shifts the frequency shifts back down to a three-dimensional aspect, and it's physical matter. So it goes from solid matter from a planet to through a dimensions, and depends on their technology, it can be various ones, back into this dimension. Now here's the trick. When it's still in those other dimensions, it can be outside your living room window. And what are you going to see or experience? You may not see it at all, or you may see something that looks like an apparition to someone not educated about the science, or something very close to like a holographic energy field. And this is why we train people in this in CE5 Contact. If you get the app, CE5 Contact, big part of this is understanding the cosmos. Because if you don't understand this cosmology, you're not going to know what's what out there. You're not going to know whether it's a man-made UFO, an interstellar UFO, ET craft that's transdimensional, or if it's some other phenomenon that's from another dimension, which exists. All right. So there are things that are from other dimensions that can pop into this, and have an effect in this. This is like poltergeist, right? Or
Right.
other phenomenon, which I have observed as an emergency doctor quite up close and personally. But that's not the same as a trans-dimensional interstellar spacecraft with people on it. Now, anyone with a scintilla of education should know this. I hate to be blunt. And when I was at the Vatican with Pope John Paul's senior theologian, Monsignor Balducci, and he was actually a demonologist, which I didn't even know such a thing existed. I wasn't raised in that tradition. But, and he said very flat out, and it was very hilarious. He said, neither angels nor demons require flying saucers. He put it so simply. And he knew what he was talking about. He knew about the whole thing of lower dimensions, higher dimensions, celestial, all. And we had these beautiful conversations about this. But what I think the intelligence community does, and particularly people like Jim Semivan and Jacques Vallée and others, is that they deliberately conflate and confuse, obfuscate this issue so that people with a religious perspective, which is fine, like Tucker Carlson or J.D. Vance or Miss Luna, they're going to utilize their religious paradigm to confuse them on the nature of what's going on with UFOs. And that is what we see happening. And I've been seeing this happen since the early 90s to now. The problem is that's a little bit of shorthand for they're from another dimension, they're not human. And from a religious point of view, certain religious perspectives, it means they're demonic, and therefore we need to have a holy war to kill them. So this is how you get into a space age holy war, through this sort of absolutely ignorant and uninformed perspective on science, on transdimensional physics, which is a whole area of covert research and development, and not understanding the overlap, which is natural, from a very advanced interstellar civilizations and other phenomenon that's real. I don't deny angels exist, or lower intelligent things that are less enlightened. You may call them demons, or uh, beings that are from another dimension altogether that may be more neutral, that pop in and out of this dimension, like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever. That is not the same as a transdimensional interstellar spacecraft with extraterrestrial biological entities on it. Now, anyone on the inside of this whole these operations that have handled the craft, and the bodies know this. But there are people in ufology that are deliberately, some of them are just uninformed, but many of them are deliberately trying to confuse this picture, and they exploit people's religious beliefs to do so. And this is the essence of demagoguery. It's very dangerous, and that's what's going on, because it leads to completely false assumptions and then bad policies, and it then relegates it to mythology. I remember when I was a young man doing this about 30 some years ago with the Board of Noetic Sciences, which astronaut Edgar Mitchell had founded. He was the sixth man to walk on the moon. I had taken him to the Pentagon when I did the briefing for the Admiral Wilson, the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff, et cetera. And so he had founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and I was invited by the board, not, it wasn't a general meeting, but by the board of directors, to do a presentation on UFOs. They also had Jacques Vallée there, who promptly told them, well, they're not extraterrestrial, they're interdimensional, and they're more like, and he said specifically, leprechauns and fairies.
Oh my God.
Yeah. All right. No. So I have been dealing with this deliberate gaslighting of prominent people, and Senator Claiborne Pell was there. I believe Lawrence Rockefeller was there. A lot of those sort of very elite people who were very involved in the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was really set up to study consciousness and consciousness studies very legitimately. They
Mhm.
were completely being gaslit. This was 30 years ago or so. So this is an old problem, but it's resurging very strongly with
Yeah.
people very close to the president and people who are in the administration and in Congress who are tasked with looking into the subject. So I wanted to put this on the record and try to explain the difference between something that is transdimensional interstellar, ET craft, and something that is just popping in or affecting in this dimension that are based in another dimension. So you can be based in another dimension and have an effect here. Like I mentioned, poltergeist and some of these other things.
Mhm.
But that's not the same as a spacecraft from another star system with people on board. Now, do they all exist? Yes, I'm not denying all of it exists. It's like I say, yeah, abductions exist, but they're being done by cutouts for the CIA, and we can prove it. So the problem becomes when all this gets thrown together and mixed together deliberately, because in that confusion, then very bad policies can evolve and very bad concepts. And I know that this is being done deliberately as a psychological warfare operation. So, unfortunately, though, there are very powerful and influential people, influencers, media, Congress people, White House people being taken in by this red herring and nonsense. But I think this is why we need to be very clear about it, and we need to do a whole educational effort with the public on this, as well. That's why I'm saying this publicly here and connecting some of these dots. The other part of it is that let's take a step back. I want to take a few more minutes. um, I don't know if anyone ever saw the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. If you haven't, go see it. It's a very, in a way, funny movie, but it's about someone flying it with a little airplane over some place, some tribe in Africa, and throwing a Coke bottle out. And I think it was something like that. And the people who found it, it became this object of supernatural powers from the gods, because it came out of the sky from this aircraft flying over. And then that evolved into first idolatry and worship, and then subsequently into conflict and fighting, right?
Right.
Now, that is exactly what this is. The other great analogy would be a book, and it's based on a not a fictional story like The Gods Must Be Crazy, but on a real story. And if the book is called Cargo Cults of the Pacific, and what these cargo cults were in the World War II, there were islands that our pilots in small airplanes were kind of landed on islands where there were tribes people who had never seen Western society, never seen an aircraft, never seen a technology. And when they took off and later came back, they found that the people of those islands and in the Pacific had made shrines that looked like a propeller airplane, and a god with goggles, the the goggles you wear in a small aircraft that's open. And they literally worshiped it because it came from the sky with something so unbelievably magical that you're flying through the air. Well, it must be a god. It must be from the gods. And so now let's go back thousands of years into religious texts and things like that. How hard or easy? How easy would it be to confuse something that's a spiritual experience, angelic or otherwise, with something that's so advanced that the technology would look like magic to you, just like the cargo cults of the Pacific. Now, remember, this is the 1940s, not 2000 or 10,000 years ago. But
Right.
now let's go back 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. Imagine what people would think if they saw a modern trans-dimensional interstellar spacecraft with people that could teleport and pop in and out. Well, your reference point, what would your reference point be?
You have
Well,
one.
I don't think it'd be too different from what unfortunately is being this bill of goods and false story being sold to J.D. Vance and Miss Luna and Tucker Carlson. And
Mhm.
and of course, this is exactly in a precise analogy. We have to be very careful with this. And the people who have sterling scientific credentials will do this deliberately because they are being paid to do so and paid to mislead leaders, the public, the media, all of it, but also relegated into the realm of mythology and religion. So it's not taken seriously from a national security point of view. So it serves many purposes to run a false narrative this way. And it's very dangerous. And there's precedent for it. The other thing is just think for a minute down the road from where my house is here in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside Charlottesville, Virginia, is Thomas Jefferson's home, who was brilliant and an inventor. A lot of people know he was a prolific inventor if you go to his home, Monticello. Now, what's fascinating is that if you were to take your smartphone and show it to Thomas Jefferson, talking to people all over the world, FaceTime or whatever it is, it would be absolutely supernatural. And I dare say, if you were in Salem, Massachusetts, you almost certainly would be burned at the stake as a witch. You'd be executed. End of discussion. Now we're talking 200 years ago, not
Yep.
2000 or 5,000. So scientifically, we have to be very careful. But I said this back in 35 years ago. Any civilization sufficiently advanced enough to get here from another star system, every aspect of their technology is going to look like magic to us in the early 21st century, in 2025. Why? Because our technology is mostly from the late 1800s. Everything we use to fly around use oil, gas, coal, nuclear power. Okay, 1945, 80 years old instead of 100.
Mhm.
So, and everything else has been suppressed and kept secret. So the only technology that we've developed more advanced than that is the digital world, which was reverse engineered from ET materials, fiber optics, night vision, digital, integrated circuits, silicon storage systems. So those are spinoffs that have been allowed to be released, I think mainly because it can be used to control people through digital media and social media. I
Right.
don't think it was anything benign. I think it's a means to control, and it's a means of mass population control and miseducation and control. I mean, look what happened to us. Our TikTok channel was taken down abruptly for no reason other than that we were telling the truth about the Boogosphere.
Right.
So, right, and the attempt by some federal officers in Mexico City to steal it the last night we were there.
Mhm.
So that warranted our whole platform being taken down.
Yep.
So I think that this is why we're still using oil and gas and coal and nuclear power and nonsense, but they've let this high tech. So when people talk about the high tech society we have, it isn't. It's a measured release of technology designed to control the masses
Mhm.
by a global superstate. Period. And not that everyone involved in technology, they're just happy to make $1 trillion by starting something like Facebook or Google or whatever. But the origins of it are out of the DARPA and the military and industrial research community. And that's where all this came from. The internet was invented by DARPA,
Yep.
right? Now, the people even in DARPA didn't know where a lot of that was coming from because it would go through Bell Labs and others, be reverse engineered, and then to be licensed and then got out. So it's 6 degrees of separation. But when you drill down on it, you realize that there has been a deliberate release of certain technologies because they serve the control needed for the
Hmm.
population prior to launching this completely false flag about aliens being a threat. So I think we have to be very careful. We're at a time where it looks like all signs are from our inside folks in intelligence and military and in Washington is that this is going to come out in the next few months or so, maybe at the most couple of years. And when it does, it needs to come out truthfully and not in a way that panics people with, you know, agents of Satan and cosmic wars and all the fear mongering and millions of reptilian Dracos on comets. I mean, this is how we end up with an extinction level event for our people. So I
No.
tell folks this is serious, it's ridiculous, but it's a serious issue and we need to get serious about it on a national level and
Yeah.
international level. Yeah.
What's concerning too, it seems like a lot of people in Washington are, like at preschool level on this topic, even though they may have interest in it, they really don't know the complexities of it and how deep this is. So they're very
Yeah.
easily manipulated one way or the other. And then
Yeah.
they're psychologically profiled with their belief systems and,
Yeah.
so it's scary.
They pick them off one by one by one. That's it.
Yep.
And that there are teams of people with great credentials, Harvard, military intelligence, CIA, and they come across as sincere. They're trained to lie. They go to a place called the farm and are trained to lie, professionally lie, and they're very effective. I hate to say it, they are very effective.
Hmm.
So, this is the real battle going on. It's the battle between what the truth about all this is versus a narrative that's fictional that manipulates people into very dangerous policies,
Yeah.
right? That put us on a war footing in space. Not good. And basically all the wars in human history at one level or another have been involved that kind of psychological warfare in order to get people to buy in, to sacrifice in blood and treasure, as they say, to have a conflict. Well, this is no different. And I
Hmm.
remind people that Colonel Holman, who was on the interagency committee to sell Star Wars, first to Jimmy Carter, President Carter, Carter was too smart to buy it and said, no, thanks. Reagan got convinced that the aliens were real, but they were a threat. And so they played the alien threat card. And Colonel Holman told me that. And
Hmm.
he laughed. He says, we knew it was nonsense, that if they were a threat, we'd be gone. But it was used effectively with someone who had very little knowledge of the subject and could be easily uh, sort of his patriotism that Reagan really had could be manipulated by them. See,
Right.
so they can manipulate your patriotism, they can manipulate your religious beliefs and whatever it is,
Hmm.
and they know exactly because what they do, the people who are the briefers and people representing this criminal part of the military industrial complex are very skilled at doing a psychological analysis. I used to call it a soul biopsy. They go in and look at what is really makes this person's tick. What are their values? What are their beliefs? And then they play to that. They're very, very good, very manipulative, but
Yep.
excellent. I have to give them credit. They do know what they're doing, even
Right.
though though it's very evil. They know what they're doing and they're expert at it. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's pretty scary.
So that's why we need to be compassionately but firmly educating people about this
Hmm.
because the stakes are too high for this thing to go sideways into superstition and nonsense.
We'll kind of integrate a question online that
Sure, let's
where
do those.
where do the negative and deceptive interdimensional entities come from? I
Well, they
mean,
come from, first of all, most of those that are operational that get confused with UFO or ET are from human manufacture.
Hmm.
So again, everyone's thinking that our technology is what you see around us. It isn't. Imagine trillions of dollars and the most brilliant people I've ever met working in covert top secret programs in corporations, reverse engineering ET technologies, right?
Right.
What would those look like? Well, what breakthroughs? And then how might you exploit those to create phenomenon? So we know that that's what happened when they ran the rancher who owned the Skinwalker Ranch off. They created a interdimensional scary phenomenon that was at certain frequencies tapping into very negative energies and very negative entities and
Hmm.
making them appear and scaring the heck out of people. Now, that can be done by humans. So even most of that happens is not just innately another dimension popping in and out. But, anything can be, I mean, but just because it's from another dimension as its origin, which is very different from another planet and star system as an origin, right?
Right.
But there's an overlap in the phenomenon, how it might look. But the ones that are either in, let's call it indigenous to another dimension, native to another dimension, or stimulated out of that dimension and brought into this 3D by the intelligence community's super high tech electronics, either way, it's not an ET. And it's not to say it doesn't exist, but do we really want to get into, let's go back to the Middle Ages and mud wrestle demons. I mean, this is the other problem. We seem to be galloping pell mell back to the Middle Ages or something here,
Yeah.
even though we're supposed to be emerging into a time of an age of enlightenment and an age of advancement where our civilization becomes very high tech and very enlightened and becomes part of an interplanetary collective, which is waiting for us. But in the meanwhile, there are all these very vested interests, whether they be religious, technological, money, whatever it is, corruption, that want us not to go there, right? So I think that the things that are from other dimensions, I don't deny they exist. I just think they're irrelevant. If you're in a state of consciousness and light, they don't have any power. It's like a mosquito flying into the sun if
Hmm.
you're grounded into higher consciousness. It's irrelevant.
I know some people seem to be susceptible more to those negative influences. So you're in a way it may be some direct parallel with where they're at mentally, maybe, or
Well, yeah, I mean, the Vedic saying that always applies. The world is as you are.
Mhm.
So, whatever level of consciousness, you're going to draw that to you,
Yeah,
right?
that makes
And
sense.
so, this is why if you go into meditation and understand the worlds of light and higher consciousness and all of that, one little candle obliterates the darkness.
Yep.
Okay. And so that's what people don't understand. Now, the more they want to dwell on the dark and dwell on the negative, that's going to make their reality. So,
Hmm.
this is something that people do, even if it's subconscious, just say, stop it. Just connect to the light, connect to the truth, and then move forward. And then the rest of this stuff is water off a duck's back. People make a boogeyman bigger than it is, and they only make it big in their mind because they're functioning at that lower level.
Hmm.
So I just say no. The light and the most great light, the light of the sun of reality, that is the root of our own spirit and consciousness, obliterates all those dark interests and entities. So that's the technique for that. It's very simple, actually. You
Yeah.
just stay in that state. And I mean, a couple of weird things happened in the ER where, like, I had a man who died in the trauma room. He'd been, they were drunk and stabbed, and he couldn't be saved. And he actually came in dead. And we tried to resuscitate him, but his left ventricle had been sliced open. And you know, after he was taken down to the morgue, about in the wee hours of the morning, the room where he had been, hooked up to all the, machines and IVs and stuff, his spirit popped into this dimension in a rage. And all the nurses saw this. We just looked at each other. Cabinets flew open, IV bags out, the EKG and the IV pumps were being turned on. Nobody was in there. We're sitting in the central pen looking at the trauma room and it's empty. And this is a true story.
Hmm.
What did I do? I connected to this higher consciousness, the most great light, the God essence, and put his spirit in that light and sent him on his way, and it stopped. So easy, so simple, not hard.
That's
And that
amazing.
was a human spirit through poltergeist is basically when they're in their spirit body, but they're still attached enough to this dimension that
Hmm.
they can sometimes do something in this dimension. Well, it's easy to make this end. You just have to be in a state of consciousness that moves them on, right?
Right.
So everyone makes all this stuff. Everyone likes I've got a horror show, right? Since we're
Right.
2 weeks after Halloween, but like, come on, guys. I mean, we're going to end up doing what?
Exactly.
Next we'll be burning witches at the stake again. It's just come on. I mean, can we please evolve a little bit? Um,
The screen there froze for a second.
yeah.
So, it also, this is why doing CE5 or even just meditation,
Mhm.
on a regular basis,
Yep.
moving into the future is so important because,
Right.
everything in our society is kind of geared to distract us and,
Right.
social media and everything, like
Yep.
just to keep us away from our spiritual selves. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah, yeah, Babylon, digital Babylon. It's a cacophony of noise and misdirections and stuff. Just put it aside a little bit, connect to your own conscious self and your own heart and higher consciousness, and it takes care of itself, and you're guided.
mhm,
One of the things, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's talking to Arjuna, and Arjuna's getting ready to go into battle and is afraid. And Krishna looks to him and he says, "A little of this eliminates all fear." Now, the this he's referring to is that connection to that higher, pure state of consciousness. That's the basis of our being awake and conscious.
mhm,
That's in the Vedas. So that's what you have to be. That's what a spirit warrior is. It's not that you're physically violent, but you're in that state and you can discern and cut through all the noise and nonsense and do something meaningful. And you really do need to practice that kind of mindfulness and knowledge when you're doing CE5 contact. And also, it gives you it lights up your intuitive remote viewing capability in your mind, but also the intuition feeling in your heart. So you have discernment between something that's from another dimension, not ET, or something that's man made from the intelligence community, that's a man made craft or some other phenomenon, or a man made fake ET, and know the difference between those and the real ones.
mhm,
So it's an indispensable way of knowing. What's termed the subjective way of knowing. Our five senses and intellect are the objective, but the intuitive knowledge and consciousness is the inner subjective way of knowing. But if you get refined enough and practice the remote viewing techniques where you develop that skill, that enables you at some point to really have your own bearing on discerning truth from fiction, right from wrong, all of that. And then you don't need, you're not going to be fooled by and gaslit by these people, who are putting out these fear narratives and misinformation and, calling. I still love how Bill Balducci just said, neither angels nor demons require flying saucers. I mean, it's like, duh, you know, and they don't get downed by an electromagnetic pulse scalar weapon and crash and have to be picked up as a physical machine. And then the bodies are autopsied and dissected.
mhm.
That's not an angel or a
Right.
demon. So, but
Exactly.
but see, this is the whole problem: is that we're having to clarify this when a scintilla of common sense would guide you out of this confusion.
Mhm,
It ain't hard. I mean, just have a little bit of common sense and a little bit of scientific knowledge. But you also need to know the cosmology, the structure of the cosmos. It's not
mhm,
just 3D material. There are these other dimensions. There's a higher, there's lower, there's the conscious field. The whole cosmos and creation is a cosmic quantum hologram that's awake, it's conscious and awake hologram. And it's all interconnected through quantum entanglement. And the ultimate quantumly entangled field is consciousness because it's present everywhere in every point in space time. So if you master that ultimate field of non-locality, or that state of consciousness that's not fixed in space-time but is omnipresent throughout space-time, then not only can you gain information, but you also develop your own ability to both intellectually and intuitively to discern and know the truth when you see it, hear it, what have you.
A question from someone online that
Mm-hmm.
this person has tried for many years to use different techniques to
Mm-hmm.
meditate, but they can never get into that deep meditative state. Is it just that some people are incapable of doing that, or is
Mm-hmm.
there some suggestion?
They're not incapable at all. They just need to find the right approach for them, but they also need to believe they can do it. What I have found is that you get into a negative feedback loop. What do I mean by that? People think that you're going to sit down, meditate, and because we live in a very immediate gratification culture, that's going to happen instantly.
Hmm.
It doesn't. It could, and it can, but it actually, it's like the elusive butterfly that alights on your shoulder eventually. So what you have to do is find a technique that you uh, find easy to do, that's relaxing and allows you to have some depth of calm and relaxation. It could be a breathing technique with a mantra, or no mantra, just a breathing technique or some other approach. And I like telling the story of an early CE5 person in LA who was a medical doctor in the early 90s, and she played the harp,
Hmm.
and she couldn't meditate well at all, but she played the harp, and she would get into a state of flow consciousness and go into deep meditation with the tones of the harp and her body moving with it, and she would have these amazing, deep, profound meditation experiences. So look, there's a path for everyone.
Hmm.
And sometimes you need to find your own path, but you need to understand the principle. And the principle is, you're really not going anywhere. You're only becoming more deeply aware of the conscious mind whereby you're awake. So everyone's awake right now listening to this. Now just stop and connect to that awareness, that mind,
Hmm.
right? There you are. And
Great.
and that's all it is. Now, there are a lot of ways to get there. I always tell people, if there are 8 billion people on the planet, in reality, even though there are different approaches in meditation and the science of consciousness, ultimately each person is like a spoke on the wheel of life, and the hub of that wheel is this unbounded pure samadhi consciousness state. But every one of us is a unique creation. Every one of us are going to find our own path to get there, which is one of the problems with gurus and organizations, is that they adopt, there'll be one approach that works for X number of people, and they want to say everyone that works for. And
Hmm.
not true. There are different types of prayer, meditation, meditative states. Uh, I've known of athletes. In fact, I would go mountain biking up on the Blue Ridge Parkway in the wilderness, and going up, for 12 miles straight up, thousands of feet up a mountain. And I would just get into this flow consciousness state and get into a higher state while I'm biking up. And other athletes will tell stories of having these peak experiences during that kind of routine. So I think everyone just has to find their own path, but they have to know where they're going. They need
Right.
to understand what the destination is. And it's connecting to that aspect of your own consciousness that is never separated from, our ego separated from this unbounded field of awareness that's everywhere. But we're always integrated into it. It's not like it comes and goes.
Hmm.
We, our own individuality, may shut off our connection to it, or not be aware of it, but we're never shut off. It's an illusion. That's the Maya. We actually think we're shut off when we're not. And on a deep level of consciousness, we're always connected at that level, which is the wellspring of intuition and precognition and lucid dreaming and all of that. but you can get there many, many ways. So I think what each person has to do is discover for their own selves, how do I experience this? How do I get there? And take the concepts and maybe some of these techniques we teach and adapt it for themselves, right?
Right.
And try it and then be creative about it. And you can experiment with it. And every culture has had their own ways of getting to that place of the
Mhm.
placeless, they call it, the place of the placeless, the place beyond space and time. And uh, Native Americans, there was a lot of drumming and chanting and things like that. That will Some people will be able to get to that state. There are so many ways, and I think that you just want to experiment with it. I reject the idea that you can't, but the other thing that's key is that if you think you can't, then you won't.
Yeah.
All right. So your attitude, let's say, or the lack of positive affirmation, if you positively say, "Oh, I can do this because that's my birthright, and I'm an awake, sentient, conscious being," then once you affirm that you can and believe in your heart of hearts that you can, you will. And
Hmm.
I think that's most people's biggest barrier is they don't believe they can. They think, "Oh, that's Dr. Greer or Ingo Swann," or it's not true. And absolutely, I reject that because Ingo Swann and I used to talk about this, the remote viewer for the CIA, and that anyone can actually do it. It's just they don't think they can. And if you think you can't, you won't.
Right.
Right? I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're a pilot and you glitch and say, "I can't land this airplane," you won't.
Right.
If you're a doctor and you need to put a chest tube in, and if you say, "Oh, I can't do this," and you won't. You have to believe you can. But
Right.
see, on this, they think, well, this is something for the masters or this person or the what? No, that's part of the problem with idolatry of organizations and people trying to set up a leader that ends up being a leader of a spiritual tradition where when it starts may be fine, but then people say, well, that person can do that, but I can't because I'm nothing and they're
Hmm.
everything. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're very much mistrained, miseducated about this. And I think the first step is to say, well, actually, I'm awake, and the mind whereby I'm conscious is omnipresent. And that is a fact. It's been proven scientifically in the science of consciousness experiments, like Dr. John did at Princeton. Study those, or read Recovering the Soul by Larry Dossey, where he goes through all these examples of meditation and prayer and the effect it has in well documented scientific and medical cases. And I think once you realize that this is everyone's domain to do and that you can do it, then you just have to experiment and try the techniques. But at some point, you need to settle on something that seems to help you center and become calm and stick with it. The other problem is that we have a lack of stick with itness and
Yeah.
discipline in our society. Everybody wants to do the what I call the drive-through McDonald drive-through of enlightenment. And let's take some ayahuasca or some psilocybin or drop some DMT and we'll have this experience and you're going to be there. No, you're not. It's a very temporary crutch.
Hmm.
So it takes, and it's old fashioned to say it sound like this, but at a certain point you have to dedicate the time and the focus to doing it, and then stick with it on a regular basis, couple three times a day, and then do retreats periodically where you do an immersion of it, where you're really taking time to be one pointed, as it says in the Vedas, where you're one pointedly looking at developing this consciousness and spiritual capabilities, and letting the world go away for a week or two, right? That's the other thing we don't do enough of. I was lucky, as a young man in 1920 to do that, become a meditation teacher, became before I, became a doctor and raised four kids and doing all this stuff. So I got a firm foundation in that. But I think everyone should give themselves that time to do it. One of
Hmm.
the things I want to do in the coming year or two is to have CE5 ambassador training program for teachers to be certified teachers, where there would be long periods of time where there wouldn't be anything, but they'd be meditating with instruction and then get together very briefly. But the days and most of the evenings would be taken up with a sort of supercharged course in experiencing higher states of consciousness, because you have to reach, and even doing some intermittent fasting with it, that helps. um, I did a lot of that when I was first exploring the capabilities in consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, this is something I'd like to do at some point in the future. And hey, anybody who can help us build our uh, retreats, we want a CE5 training center up on the land we have in Hot Springs, Virginia. We're ready to start on that this year in 2026. We
Great.
want to build a place up there where we can all gather on. We have 684 acres surrounded by national forest. It's an ideal place to do all this. Yeah.
Great. Let's do a few more questions.
Sure.
Kind of backtracking a little bit. So, for example, with 3I Atlas, we know it is a natural phenomenon, but yet it's being used for some psychological value. So how can they use something that's natural and twist it around and then fool everybody?
Well, the way they do it is by getting somebody with sterling credentials at a really high-end university like Harvard. And
Mhm.
this has been done for decades. I remind people that that's what Dr. Donald Menzel did in the 50s for the CIA, and we have the documents to prove it.
Yeah.
And he would set up, he was a professional debunker that would go around and say, "Oh, none of this is true." And the document even talks about in enlisting amateur astronomers to throw a pie plate up, take a picture of it, put it out there, let people claim it was a flying saucer, and then come forward and say, "Ah, see, they're all just pie plates and things like a frisbee being thrown up." Although this is
Mhm.
before frisbees existed, I think. And so this is the kind of thing that they do. And by using someone with sterling credentials, because people go, "Oh, he's a doctor from Harvard, therefore every word he says must be true." Well,
Yeah.
no, actually not if you've been corrupted, or you're just, a grandstanding, or you're trying to get $1 billion for some harebrained planetary defense scheme, which is
Mhm.
what he's asking for. So I think this is why you have to be like, whenever there's a narrative like that attached to something, you can almost bet that it's being driven through Knox, non-official cover, people who are acting undercover on behalf of this cabal of this transnational criminal organization with an agenda
Mhm.
other than the truth. If it were the truth, they wouldn't be saying these things. And by the way, I always remark that all the way back to the people I've talked to from the 40s and 50s that were on retrieval teams, dealing with ETs. None of them ever encountered a hostile one. Never, none of them ever were harmed. All of them universally have said that they felt terrible with what we were doing to them. And yet, the narrative in almost all of ufology and now running through the government is that they're marauding people doing horrible things. And, you know, Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford, another Ivy League school, receiving money from CIA and others to document the brain damage being done through UAP encounters. Of course, not mentioning that all of those people were encountering our man made
Right.
UFOs and stagecraft, as it's called. So, this is one of the real problems, and it's time that we just call it out. Now, that's not happening much. Unfortunately, there are only a few voices in the world doing this,
Yeah.
which means that you have people who, I'm a retired emergency doctor, versus legions of people with military, CIA, and academic credentials at Ivy League schools saying the opposite. You
Mhm.
see the problem?
Yeah.
It's a problem. It's a big problem. I can't help it, but that's what it is. All I can do is speak the truth as I have discovered it, and speak it faithfully, and then people will use their own brains to see if what we're saying is rational versus the fiction being foisted on them from these people with awesome and sterling academic credentials or government credentials.
Right. Um, so These two questions kind of relate to each other, but Eric Hecker, who was one of our
Mhm.
witnesses down in the South Pole, he was talking about some voice to skull systems, which seems to come up a lot where people are
Mhm.
feeling like they're being directly attacked electronically.
Mhm.
Um, is there
Yeah.
some way for people to recognize if that's actually the case? Like, what
Well,
do you?
yeah. I mean, well, first of all, some of it could also be if someone is mentally unstable and doing drugs or what have you, because they can simulate certain mental illnesses, let's
Mhm,
say. And not everyone having hearing voices or whatever is necessarily being targeted by a electronic or psychotronic weapon system. But yeah, I mean, the Havana syndrome, that well documented, was such a technology, but there are much more advanced ones. Now, a lot of times, I hate to say it, delusional or paranoid person will claim that. That's where you get into the tinfoil hat crowd.
mhm,
And it isn't true. It's just that they're mentally unstable. And so this gets to another problem because not everything that appears to be something is what it appears to be. It could be just an innate mental problem. Now, that is not to at all negate the fact that since at least the 50s that I know of, there have been very well developed radionic, as they're called, or psychotronic technologies that can remotely influence people's consciousness or even induce thought conditions or emotional states. Um, and that has been well documented, and it's way beyond what was disclosed in the Senator Church hearings in Congress about MK Ultra and things like this that were using, of course, LSD and other substances. This is the high end of that, dealing with the electronics that are transdimensional and can affect consciousness, but also the brain activity, and can cause thoughts or hear voices or what have you. Those are real, and actually, those have been and are being used in a criminal way. And we have recommended to law enforcement that those also be looked at because they're used unfortunately also on the P3 or psychotronic operators that are often children that are kidnapped and trafficked and brought in, and then they use those electronics as well as drugs to get them into a state where they can then do some of the remote access with consciousness of the ET craft and hijack their guidance systems and then shoot them down. And this is most of them, as we've been told, by people who have dealt with this directly in covert sites, have said that most of those people end up in a coma or end up dying. So there's a lot of abuse, but there are other people who have been targeted by such technologies that can destabilize them mentally.
mhm.
And so this kind of abuse of advanced electronic systems is something that should be stopped. It isn't going to get stopped until the authorities know they exist. And this is one of the big challenges of disclosure, is to get people who have the authorization. I have no such authorization, to actually take action to rein in the worst criminal abuses of these advanced technologies. And to my knowledge, that all was well developed electronically by the 1950s, mid to late 1950s.
So if a person is experiencing that, it would seem, and you've mentioned this before, I mean, part of negating that would also be being able to go inside and, tap into your own inner resources.
Yeah, part of it is a lot of people are just paranoid and grandiose, and they want to
Mhm.
think they're being targeted with such a thing. Um, I'm so blunt, but it's like, no, they're not.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, really? No, it's not like it's being done that widespreadly. There
Mhm,
has to be some high value target associated with it. Now, if you think you are, it's not hard, and I have been. I was 1994, that abduction sequence I experienced after I briefed the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, Hans Adam, was a classic use of that. But I knew what it was, and I just went into quiet consciousness, called on the higher conscious being, the Godhead, and went into a state of meditation and it cut it off. Now,
mhm,
each time I returned to my normal individual self, I'd be hit again. but I just kept, and then, I was able to overcome it. But yeah, so the real answer to that, yeah, I'm sure there are electromagnetic countermeasures to it. Um, People think they're selling those. I'm not sure they work, but the ultimate one is your own consciousness being linked to the. Here's the thing, the great sun of reality. Look at it as an infinite ocean of consciousness,
Hmm.
and each of us, our individualities, are a drop or a ripple, a wave on the surface. If you connect only to your little self, you're vulnerable. But if you tie your little self to the great being, to the unbounded, and do it sincerely, they can't do anything with that.
Right.
So that's another example where a little bit of light eliminates all the darkness. So that is the best technique. It's a sort of mastery of your own mind and consciousness, but the ability also to call upon you can see it as your higher self, or the God essence, or the great spirit, whatever you want to call it. But when you call on that, or even intermediaries like angelic beings or an avatar type being or what have you, it puts it different perspective, a dynamic power dynamic, where then the power shifts not from just your own individual little self that's vulnerable, but you are connected to this greater aspect, and that cuts it off.
Right.
Because they can't grab the whole ocean; they can grab your drop. Let's put
Hmm.
it that way. So that's the way to approach it. But again, I wouldn't give too much energy to that. I think people get into a lot of troll the internet too much. Just go and meditate and do CE5, and get out of your head space a little bit, and the paranoid and the grandiosity, frankly, and just be real. This is, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I think people give it way too much power.
Hmm. One more quick thing. A lot of people are asking about James, who has this cylindrical object that's
Oh
sort
yeah.
of like similar to the Boogosphere.
Yeah.
Um, I know we try to reach out to him, but
Mhm.
do you have any comments on that?
Yes, well, if anyone knows how to dialogue with him, we're ready to secure it, protect it, have it scientifically tested, which is granted very expensive to do properly, and really get to the bottom of what that is. And but it's not in our possession, so all we can do is make the offer. So anyone listening, you can reinforce our offer by contacting him with his social media and say, the scientific team and Dr. Greer are very happy to help with this, because he keeps bringing it up. But we have offered that assistance, and it has not been taken.
Yep.
Now, so that's where that rests. As far as what that object is, I don't know. I mean, it's one of two things. It's either a non-human object that's shaped differently than the Boogosphere, and seems newer, or it's a man-made one simulating the Boogosphere, and it became prominently known as a diversion about the time the Boogosphere went viral in terms of being all over the internet. And so at this point, I I'm completely agnostic about it. I don't know. It's certainly from where it landed in Nevada. I don't
Hmm.
know the exact location, but I know there are a lot of assets we have there using anti-gravity and exotic technologies. They're euphemistically called in the aerospace industry ATs, advanced technology. It's just a euphemism. So it very well could be, uh, but if it's man-made, I think that's actually a greater significance to get to the bottom of that and prove that it is, because then it pulls the curtain back on what covert programs have and what they've been using to gaslight the public in these decoy fake ET cases and fake UFO cases. So if it's not human, that's amazing. If it is human, that's amazing, right?
Right.
So I think it should be thoroughly investigated, but not by trying to crack it open and drill into it and doing other childish things. I mean, it needs to be done properly, and safely. So we're
Right.
offering to do that, but so far our offer has not been acted upon by James. And so all I can say is the offer stands. And if he wants to have help doing this, we're very much wanting to do it.
Great. Well, it's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And keep the light burning. And if I don't see you before Thanksgiving, have a great Thanksgiving if you're here in the States. Yeah.
Great. All right.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.